Due to efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and protect all individuals, the council chambers at Town Hall will not be open to the public to attend council meetings until further notice. Members of the public who have an interest in a matter listed on the agenda may, up until 10 a.m. on the day of the scheduled council meeting, email councilagenda@orangeville.ca indicating your request to speak to a matter listed on the agenda. A phone number and conference ID code will be provided to you so that you may join the virtual meeting and provide your comments to council. Members of the public wishing to raise a question during the public question period of the council meeting may begin at 8 p.m. on the evening of the council meeting by calling 1-289-801-5774, conference ID 534-327-919, number sign. Correspondence and email submitted will be considered as public information and entered into the public record. Okay, any luck yet, Tracy? Okay. Well, those in attendance, shall we collectively sing the national anthem?
And just see if we can, we might be able to get him, Your Worship. He's on the chat session. So I just told him to call myself.
Oh, he is on the chat?
Yeah.
Oh. Anybody watching at home? We're just waiting for our national anthem singer, David Nairn, to join us. Oh, David, did you connect?
I did. I believe I'm there. Hello.
Hey, welcome. So, David, we are ready. Well, thank you very much for connecting with us tonight, and we're ready for our Canadian national anthem. So, go ahead, sir.
Oh, Canada, a home and native land, true patriot love, in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nairn.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, have a good evening, David. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, at this moment, we'd like to say our land acknowledgement. And of course, this month is Indigenous Heritage Month, so we want to pay tribute to our Indigenous residents. Here we go with our land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and are streamed live and may be typed for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. On the Rise and Report, which exactly as it is. Okay, very good. So we had a closed session tonight. And coming out of that, I'm going to read a recommendation that the confidential report CPSCL 2020-018 regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, committee appointments be received, and that the confidential verbal report from Ed Brennan, CAO, regarding a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, and proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, potential land acquisition be received, and that the confidential verbal report from Ed Brennan, CAO, regarding a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, and a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, a potential land acquisition be received, and that the confidential report IS-ENV 2020-01 regarding litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advise that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, the investigation be received, and that staff proceed as directed. Do I need a motion for this? May I have a motion, councillors, to accept this recommendation? Councillor Sherwood, seconded by?
You don't see us?
I'll second it. I can't. I saw you say yes. Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that has passed unanimously. Thank you. All right, we also have to have a motion regarding a recommendation that the minutes of the following meetings are approved. The June 8th, 2020 council and closed council meeting. May I have a motion? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Okay, that's passed unanimously. Thank you. Presentations, petitions, and/or delegations. First delegation is Shirley Ramsey and Noel Ramsey, 11.1 regarding dogs at large bylaw. Mr. or Mrs. Ramsey.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay. May I proceed?
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and councillors. Our names are Noel and Shirley Ramsey. We live here in Orangeville, and we definitely appreciate you giving us some time this evening to address council. The concern that we are bringing forth this evening is how the town deals with dogs at large, the bylaws regarding dogs, and the town's enforcement of the current bylaws. At no point in our discussion do we intend to identify any individuals or property owners regarding ongoing issues. However, we would note that the town's bylaw enforcement department, the SPCA, and the police force are well aware of those involved and with what has brought us together tonight. The handouts that we believe have been made available to you this evening show the bylaw 68-2000. This covers the licensing of dogs, the control of dogs, and vicious dogs. Bylaws such as these are put in place to ensure public safety, as well as the humane treatment of animals. To put our concern in perspective, we would like to cover a brief summary of what has been experienced by ourselves and is still ongoing in our neighborhood. I would like to say that this summary is a patchwork quilt of our own interactions and those of neighbors in our area. It is also a patchwork quilt in the sense that some incidents were reported to the SPCA and some to the police. Some incidents were not reported to anyone at all, as the numerous residents involved were not aware that this was a persistent problem in the area and the dogs were just picked up by their owner. This list represents the incidents of which we have become aware. Starting in the fall of 2017, we encountered these loose dogs in the Bromount Lane while walking our own dog. A few weeks later, the same dogs were loose again, and I tried to advise the owner at home. Following this, we recorded 24 incidents of these dogs being loose, and in at least 12 of these incidents, the authorities were involved. This list includes 2 attacks resulting in $600 in vet bills, 2 incidents with residents being knocked down in the streets, 2 incidents with the dogs getting into residents' homes, including own home, 1 incident where the dog owner was peeking into our house looking for their dogs, and 3 incidents where dog walkers were accosted by these loose dogs. In 2 of these situations, I personally required help from neighbors and people passing by at the time.
Good evening. My name is Noel Ramsey. Before I continue, I'd like to reemphasize that these are not different dogs, but the same dogs, all from one resident. I feel that the risk to the public is minimal, but we can tell you from personal experience that it's not. Before moving to Orangeville, we had a friend in his 50s knocked off a bicycle by a loose dog, a small loose dog, and he suffered a significant brain damage. Again, years later, our own 10-year-old daughter was bitten in the face by a Dalmatian running loose. So what's the local risk here? With vehicles and pedestrians using our busy streets like First Street, loose dogs, large or small, on the street create a hazard that could result in personal injury or property damage. With senior citizens out for a stroll, dogs knocking them down could easily cause significant injuries. Any resident out for a walk could have a difficult encounter, especially if they're out walking their dog. Not to mention what can happen with young children walking around with a snack. And yes, they can also attack other dogs that are properly tethered and licensed. As mentioned before, the town does have bylaws to cover this. In the bylaws, section 4, you need to have a license and the tag is to be securely fixed to the dog at all times. But we have noticed that the fines are not necessarily adhered to when the authorities are involved. Dogs have been loose with no license, or have been loose with a reported license but no tag present. In section 5, the owner should not allow his dog to be at large. 5.7 indicates that this could be dealt with by bylaw enforcement officer, police constable, or animal control officer. But we have noticed that these authorities may just return the dog to the owner in some cases without fines. And before the problem was brought on by COVID-19, we were told the SPCA here in town only handles these situations Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and from 11 to 3 on weekends. We have called the local police, who have indicated that they have nowhere to take the animals, or they don't have the time to deal with these types of situations. In section 6, regarding vicious dogs, there have been multiple attacks resulting in multiple vet bills for some neighbors. But the follow-through was dropped as the dogs in question seemed to be nice, and it was indicated that a muzzle could not properly fit the animal. If you question or doubt any of these comments, I suggest you ask the authorities to refer to their own records. We are talking about a chronic problem that has been ongoing for over 2 years. The ask we have tonight is to review and revise this bylaw and or tighten up the enforcement of what is on the books. When in court about these dogs, we have heard that not much more can be done until someone gets injured. We hope that you would have the same concern that we do, that when you know you have a chronic offender or safety issue, you don't want to wait until someone is injured and the town possibly sued. We appreciate your time to consider this issue and the time you have given us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, for your report, your delegation. Any councillors wish to speak to this tonight? Okay, so I'm aware of some of these issues. I'm wondering if, Madam Clerk, if you could just give a brief update on what's gone on to this point and how bylaw enforcement has.
Okay, I can advise council with respect to some of the issues that have been raised here this evening that the OSPCA together with Orangeville Police have responded with respect to complaints that have been made with respect to a dog running at large in the area, as the delegates have indicated. It is also my understanding that there are matters before the court in this regard, and once COVID-19 emergency orders are lifted and once the courts are able to resume hearing these matters, those matters will proceed through the courts accordingly. During some of the investigations as it relates to the dog running at large, there were also some concerns that were raised with respect to a property in the area as it relates to property standards matters, and those matters are currently being investigated by staff, and appropriate action is being taken as it relates to obtaining compliance with the town's property standards bylaw.
Okay.
You are on mute, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, folks, I was muted there. I was just asking Madam Clerk, the date of this bylaw is it 2000? I see Deputy Mayor White signed this on July 2020. Is this particular bylaw, Madam Clerk, in your list of priorities?
So I can confirm for council that this is a 2000 bylaw, and yes, this particular bylaw is on the work schedule over our 10-year plan, and it's actually due for review later on this year. Currently, as council is aware, we're reviewing the aspect as it relates to making changes to permit the keeping of hens as a trial program. A second part of what council asked us to look into with respect to this particular bylaw had to do with the regulation or whether to continue to allow or not allow the keeping of pigeons on a property. We've also had delegates come forward with respect to the registration of cats. So this particular bylaw in whole will be reviewed later on this year. That's what the schedule indicates.
Okay, very good. So, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, from what we understand, bylaw enforcement is looking at property standards with respect to the property in question. We know that the dogs have been loose as a result regarding standards, and that the property owner has been able to deal with those issues by June 30th, my understanding. Madam Clerk has also indicated that this bylaw is going to be reviewed, and as part of that process, there is some public engagement, and we'll ask Madam Clerk to reach out to both Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey at the appropriate time to get further input into changes that may be necessary to this bylaw. Okay, councillors, anything further here before we move on to the next delegation? I see nothing, so we will move on. Thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, for your time tonight.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay. All the best. Okay, delegation 11.2, Allison Shield from the Orangeville BIA. Allison, welcome. Are you on board tonight?
Yes, I am. Thanks very much for having me.
Yes.
I seem to be making a bit of a habit of this, so I appreciate your patience tonight.
Yes.
I had submitted a letter to council a couple of weeks ago, and I believe that's been included in your agenda package. It's a bit of a lengthy letter, and I don't want to have to, bore everybody by reading it through tonight. I was basically here just to answer any questions you might have, but I can give a brief overview for those people who are listening in or watching it, if you like.
Allison, there's a number of issues that you've brought forward here. Can you maybe prioritize what maybe the top 3 or 4 would be for the BIA, and which ones you would like to see council work together with the BIA to implement, or if you could just maybe touch on 3 or 4 that you think are priorities for the BIA.
Well, sure. So first of all, the BIA wanted to make sure that council understood that it was in support of, council investigating any opportunities to develop 82 to 90 Broadway for commercial use and also for a tiered parking lot. So we just wanted to make sure you were aware of that and make that official. So that's number one. Number two is the idea of a public plaza for Alexandra Park and 27 to 29 First Avenue, and perhaps even including 2nd Street, depending on how that might look at some point in the future. So that's a really big one, and we're really hoping that if there's perhaps any stimulus money coming from the federal government or the province, that might be a great project for council to consider. So that's a very big one, and I believe that Sylvia Bradley is on your delegation list tonight, and I think she wants to speak specifically about some ideas she has for that. The BIA board approved Sylvia's plans in principle as a basic start for the plaza. So you can look at her plan, decide whether or not that's a good one, or if you want to make any changes to that. I'm sure that there'll be lots of people who have lots more knowledge than we do about that, and hopefully they'd come up with some really great ideas. But the idea is that it would be a 4-season plaza, that it could be used in all 4 seasons of the year, not just in the summer. So that's priority number 2. And then as far as number 3 goes, it's the time to consider creating a community improvement plan specifically for downtown, or a community-wide one with a focus on downtown. It's been a really long time, 30 years since the last plan was done, and we think it's time, especially considering that there are so many projects either being planned for downtown or projects that we would like to happen for downtown, including a tourism plan that's being done right now. So we think the timing for that is really good. And the projects that are kind of on the books for right now, including the sidewalk redevelopment, that could incorporate kind of the beginnings of a lot of those other projects that we would like to have happen, like a downtown lighting plan, conduits for lighting up the trees, if that's something that could be incorporated into that, removing the old fountains and the old meter posts, and just kind of generally tidying up downtown, looking at all the signage and trying to kind of declutter downtown is a big thing. I know Mayor Brown, you had an interest in some gateway arches, and those would require some reinforced engineering support. So perhaps that would be included in that. There's lots of things. Public washrooms, we've got a whole long list of things we would love to see happen downtown. And we just want to mention all of them. So there was a kind of an overarching view of what could happen, and then to consider all of those things in smaller projects like the sidewalk development. It sounds like a small project. Well, it's actually a big project, but there could be lots of things that were kind of included as part of that. So just to have a bigger view of things instead of just, one project at a time view.
Very good.
So that's essentially what the letter is about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt there. So the long term would be to have a community improvement plan, and I would imagine that would take quite some time to develop. I wouldn't imagine it would be happening this year. It would have to be something that would have to be budgeted for well in advance. But in the short term, to have a really kind of a high level view of the projects that are going to happen within the next year that are already scheduled.
Right. Well, thank you. It's a good letter. Lots of good things in there. I know Town Council wants to work towards making the downtown core a more exciting place to visit. So things like providing additional parking, maybe adding some residential component in a building across the road, creating a new public square, and all the things that you talked about. The community improvement plan. There's also a Parks and Recreation master plan, the improvement in the streetscape with the sidewalks. So there's a lot of good things that we're working on right now, and I think all of it's to help make the downtown core more attractive for tourists, and we're working on a tourism plan right now as well to invite tourists to come, and also the residents of Orangeville to enjoy our beautiful downtown, which we know needs some additional tweaking. But I really like the public square idea. I think programming on the public square would be able to be done by both the BIA and the town, and maybe other interested groups. So that's one thing I'd like to see happen going forward. Councillors, anybody like to weigh in on Allison's delegation at all? Everybody's either frozen or they're not interested. No. Okay. Well, thank you, Allison, very much for bringing forward your letter. We look forward to working with the BIA. I know that you will be consulted and the BIA members regarding the proposed parking structure / multi-use building across the road. You know that there is a legal agreement that the town is tied in together with the BIA. So we certainly hope to have your input as something gets planned for that space. So thank you very much. All right.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Right. All the best, Allison. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving forward, we have our next delegate is former councillor Sylvia Bradley. Sylvia, welcome.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, good evening to Mayor Brown, Deputy Mayor McIntosh, and Council. It's certainly a pleasure to be speaking with you tonight about this exciting idea. And first, I'd like to apologize for the delay in getting the text and the pictures to you. I had a bit of a disconnect, but I hope that you all got them and had an opportunity to take a look at it. And I'll refer to that later on. One of the many recommendations that Roger Brooks, the downtown consultant that the BIA had hired, had made was to develop a town plaza or a town square to provide a meeting place for downtown residents, a destination for all Orangeville residents, and a tourist destination. One of the challenges in the heritage downtown is finding an appropriate location. In Orangeville, we are actually very fortunate because we have the perfect opportunity utilizing Alexandra Park, 2729 First Avenue, and 2nd Street. This idea was presented to the BIA, as Allison just mentioned, and they adopted it in principle and support moving ahead. And there has been interest shown by service clubs as well. The proposal is a 3-stage process. The first stage would be to relocate the cenotaph and all the other memorial items to 2729 First Avenue, where a new memorial, Legion, Veterans Park, whatever the name is chosen, would be built, complete with walking trails, a pavilion to provide shelter, especially for Remembrance Day celebrations for the veterans, benches, flower gardens, a raised vegetable garden, and fruit trees. And of course, all the cenotaph and all the other items would be there as well. And there would be some parking at the north end of that park. So this would be a brand new dedicated memorial park that would be a place of serenity, a place of rest, and it would be a very peaceful place for the veterans and for all of the town of Orangeville. The second stage would be to build a town plaza in Alexandra Park. There would be an opportunity to build a permanent stage with an amphitheater that could be used throughout the year, a walking skating trail, a naturalized playground, game and hobby areas, and a water feature and seating areas. And this would be truly the gathering place for the people of Orangeville, a destination for them to go and actually do something in a park. Then the third stage would be to redevelop 2nd Street into a permanent farmers market or pedestrian mall that could be used all year round for multiple purposes. I hope you have the attached drawings, and I would like to kind of go through that with you and talk about the kind of the initial sketch. It's certainly very preliminary and it's not very professional, but it was the best I could do. And it's a starting point, and then we can move forward with that. So if you have the photos or the drawing, the sketch of Orangeville today, it just really shows you, the top picture shows you the 2729 First Avenue as it currently is, which is basically nothing there, just an open area. The Below that is the current Alexandra Park with the cenotaph in the middle, the pink, the gazebo, as you can see, and all the other items. The red lines indicate parking. If you move down then to Orangeville tomorrow, the top picture there, sketch, shows what the new Memorial Park could look like with the path. The pink in the center is the cenotaph. The other trails all around it as walking trails and the other items, the other memorial items.
Sylvia, can I hold you for 1 sec?
Sure.
Is it possible for one of our staff members to share this photo on? Do you have it, Tracy, or?
Tracy has it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she sent it out.
Yeah, we're just hoping that we can share it.
That would be lovely. Like I said, I apologize that I thought it was sent and it wasn't sent, and there was a bit of a disconnect.
So let's see here. Okay. I have it on my screen right now.
Looks like Councillor Taylor has it there.
No, Councillor Taylor, can you share your screen there? He has. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Bradley, we're looking at, I guess, the last iteration here showing the extension of Town Square into 2729 First Avenue. We're seeing the amphitheater and the gazebo and the potential for pedestrian mall on 2nd Street as well. So that's up on the screen right now.
Okay, perfect. So, as I said, there's many opportunities. The big round circle, it shows you the amphitheater. The smaller blue in the center is the water feature. The rectangular blue at the bottom, closer to the bottom, is potentially where the stage could be. The path going around would be the walking trails in the summertime and the skating trails in the wintertime. The gazebo is located on that kind of the right-hand side. I think we'd have to really take a good look at that because the gazebo is not very functional and it's certainly not accessible. So I think that we could do better and perhaps relocate that somewhere. In the far corner is you can hardly see it, is the natural playground for the children. And then the other areas throughout that square are, places for people to recreate and tables to sit and whatnot. And then, of course, the blue on the 2nd Street would be the pedestrian mall or the permanent farmers market, stage 3. We've got the washrooms here. I thought maybe that there might be an opportunity to open up the wall from the outside to at least give some public washrooms available, kind of in the shorter term, or else we would have to look at building another facility for public washrooms, but that's really an important thing.
Right.
Again, the red indicates parking. So we would add some parking. I think there'd be some that would be lost, but we would also be adding some as well. And then the very bottom one, you probably can't have that on there, but there's other opportunities with expanding the town square with possible land acquisitions around the Memorial Park area. And then closing down the street to connect Alexandra Park to Memorial Park or Veterans Park, whatever it's called. And so, as I said, this thing is really it's a beginning. and it's just meant to give a brainstorming ideas. The next thing, of course, is we also sent some pictures, and I don't know if you can access them, and they're just pictures of other places that have done something similar to what we're proposing here, and it gives you an idea of what can happen in these beautiful locations.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah, it's all very interesting, and I'm personally in favor of improving this space and making it more usable for our residents. Councillor Sherwood, you wish to weigh in, and then I've got Councillor Andrews as well. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Having a town plaza would be a social, cultural, and economic benefit to our town and residents, and of course to our tourists. Roger Brooks, he was a professional downtown consultant hired by the BIA, recommended establishing a town plaza. So I'm in general support of a town plaza, and I'm just wondering, can staff speak to us about any upcoming plans, such as the Parks and Recreation Master Plan or the Community Improvement Plan that will incorporate this concept? Is Mr. Osmond available to speak on this?
Mr. Osmond.
Sure, Your Worship. Thank you. Through to Councillor Sherwood. You're absolutely correct. First off, the CIP report is being prepared and is going to be coming before Council in July. And you're actually correct. It would include these kinds of pieces of infrastructure and plazas and so on, and a number of other things that Alison Shell just referred to a few minutes ago. The actual plaza itself, I will say that the Recreation and Parks Master Plan, that too is coming forward to Council in July. And in fact, it did come up in the process. And my understanding, I'm not sure how extensive it is, but I understand that the consultant has included a concept of sorts in the actual plan to give some idea what they feel is coming out of the report from the public and from stakeholders. So the master plan itself will definitely reference the plaza, and as the presenter just mentioned, the actual layout of certain spaces in the Alexandra Park, whether it's the cenotaph or whether it's the plaza, the Alexandra Park itself, the spatial requirements for certain things, the requirement for things such as gazebos or amphitheaters or skating tracks and so on and so forth. These kinds of things are into a further planning process in the future. Definitely will be something we'll be taking a look at, whether it's something that's off of Broadway into Alexandra Park or back into the First Ave property. It's a whole thing we'll be taking into consideration when the plan comes forward, but CIP would definitely speak clearly to it. I would also mention that the tourism master plan or tourism strategy being done currently will also speak to some of the needs in terms of the farmers market, the plaza, and again, you see some synergies between all these documents.
So just to follow up, Your Worship, just so at that time after you present that, Mr. Osmond, we can take the opportunity to ask you to consider this concept, or is this something that you will be able to put into the report you'll present to us in July?
The report in July, coming in July, is now written. It should be, well, actually, you should get a look at that in the next few days before it comes before Council, and it will speak to this type of plaza, but the actual design features of this plaza in particular, what Ms. Bradley's put forward here is one concept, some great concepts in terms of how you would lay something like this out in terms of bringing people into the downtown and capitalizing on people coming to Orangeville as a destination. So again, the different pieces, the tourism strategy, the CIP in terms of long-term view, futuristic view, which should be done in terms of how all these pieces fit together, whether it's the work you're doing on Broadway with the pavers, or whether it's this plaza, or whether it's the arches coming into the downtown. All these pieces need to be brought together in one full report, and that will be included in CIP. In the meantime, the master plan spoke to it because what residents would like to see is more opportunities in the downtown to recreate, if you would, in things like skating trails, walking trails that are connected, and things that you can do in the downtown, whether it's in an amphitheater type environment, or whether it's a festival or event, and those kinds of things. And that would all fit into the overall scheme of things when you're looking at the plans going forward. So yes, to the short answer, I guess, Councillor Sherwood, would be we would definitely address it once Council gives us direction from the report.
Very good. Thank you. Who was up there? Councillor Andrews, did you speak? Yes, go ahead, sir.
I do, and again, thank you very much, Your Worship, and some very similar questions that Councillor Sherwood had posted to both Ms. Bradley as well as Mr. Osmond. Thank you, Mr. Osmond, for your clarification, and of course with some of the information that will be forthcoming to Council in July. This is more of a commentary than anything else. I'm very impressed. I know these are preliminary concept drawings, but I really like the idea, and putting on my economic development hat here, this is a huge benefit to the community at some point. I do like the idea of the amphitheater, having lived in other communities where amphitheaters were created and really brought the performing arts to the downtown core. This is really a critical piece. I'm also very impressed by the idea in the future of the farmers market and the archway. I guess the question, and again, this is very premature because it's I'm looking at phase number 3, where the potential acquisition of some of the properties on the eastern side of the location. This would be certainly something that would be discussed at Council at some point. But Ms. Bradley, again, we have a long connection to some of the activity going back a number of years ago on 2nd Street there with, I still recall, First Night celebrations and how it brought the community together to the downtown core. And we know that in addition to the farmers market, this is a very important part of our community. It has a lot of history, and I think that this whole concept is really brilliant. I think from my perspective, I know this is premature, but from a timeline, what would you anticipate? And again, this has to go through so many different processes. Mr. Osmond, of course, is going to be presenting, as I mentioned already, his report in July. But what would you say a potential timeline for something like this? And again, you're just someone that has come forth with the idea, and again, this would be through some of the other staff that would be involved. But are we talking 10 years down the road? Are we talking 5 years down the road? What would you like to see somehow this, from a timeline perspective, be implemented?
Well, obviously, I'd like to see something happen sooner than later, particularly right now with the situation with the federal and provincial government probably going to be handing out some infrastructure money. That might be a perfect opportunity if we had something to go on to at least get it kick-started. The first stage of this being the Memorial Park is probably the easiest of all the items to do, and I can see that we could probably get that thing going fairly quickly. And I don't know how, again, I have no costing as far as what it would cost, but I do know that there is public support in the community, and that I'm pretty sure that we could get that thing rolling pretty quickly. Once the reports come in from Parks, then maybe we can pull out from there and say, okay, let's move on with this and get a proper design made and perhaps get some engineering reports and get things going. For me, the sooner the better. I can see it being anywhere from a 5 to 7 year plan overall.
Okay. Thank you very much. But again, thank you for the visuals that we've also received.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Any further questions from councillors before we let Ms. Bradley go?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to start off by thanking Ms. Bradley for taking the time to put this beautiful plan together. There's so much about this plan that I think makes a lot of sense and would be an absolutely fantastic addition into our community when it comes to public meeting spaces. Now, there has been some preliminary talk from what I understand, or the plans have been communicated slightly to the members of the Legion. And I've had the opportunity to speak to some of the members of the Legion, including the Legion president, Mr. Barry Kimber. And from what he has told me, the Legion is absolutely not in support of moving the cenotaph. Now, I wanted to speak to maybe Mr. Osmond might be the right person to ask this question to, but are we in any agreements with the Legion currently for the memorial pieces that are currently existing in Alexandra Park, first of all? And secondly, as part of the recreation plan that you're working on, if this idea or concept is something that we're looking at, could those initial conversations with the Legion be part of that preliminary process? Some of their concerns included accessibility and space. I'm not sure the size of those properties on First Avenue, but they were concerned that there wasn't enough space to hold the Remembrance Day ceremonies the way that we have been. Also accessibility issues with the way that the ground is. So I'm not sure if it's too early for me to ask those questions, but I know in conversation with them, they were not in support of this idea. So I just wanted to get some input maybe from Mr. Osmond, if that's okay.
Mr. Osmond.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Councillor Post. First of all, you're absolutely correct. One of the things that would happen in a process of this nature would be to engage all the various stakeholders. In this case, we have one right on the ground in Alexandra Park. And the Legion, I'm not familiar with the Legion agreement, if there is one per se. That's one of the things we would discuss, of course. It's a long-standing memorial park area. It has a lot of features to it on its own. And one of the things we would look at is that we would have a lot of conversations with the Legion in terms of what you would see in a future layout for a cenotaph or memorial park. The location that is referred to in this report off of First Ave could very well work. It would need to be laid out. It would need a landscape plan to it. It would need to show all the features that the Legion enjoy today, and maybe some futuristic pieces that they would see in the future in terms of what would happen in terms of people coming to the site. Example would be, a floral display, flowers and that kinds of thing, those kinds of things that you typically see in some of these memorial parks. The idea of having an area where people can get under a structure for shelter, whether it be in the middle of July or July 1st ceremony, or whether it be in the fall, those kinds of things are great features that are not enjoyed now. So some of these things, you're right, there's a lot of engagement to be had, there's a lot of discussions to be had, and the Legion would be one of the first groups that would come to the table and have that discussion. And that's something that would come forward when you get into the planning process.
Very good. And I think, Councillor Post, any concerns about accessibility, I think would also be included in this discussion. I don't think any municipal work can go forward without accessibility being an important part of that. So I believe that would all be captured in a landscape design that we would, a landscape architect that would be engaged here to help us with this. So
definitely. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, I think that there's a lot of value to moving the cenotaph to a spot where it won't be sat on during music events and things like that. Right now, you find that in the park, those monuments are disrespected when some of the community pieces come together. So it's nice to have it off in its own spot. So I'm hoping that's something we can work with the Legion to make it work, because I think it makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Right. The other thing that we could also think about, Councillor Post, it's been called Alexandra Park for 100+ years, but maybe we can incorporate, Veteran Square or something like that into this, renaming of this area to honor those members of the Legion and veterans as part of this process. Councillor Taylor, I saw you had your hand up, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to say again, and Councillor Post did it, but to our former councillor and friend Sylvia Bradley, thank you so much for bringing this forward. I think it's a splendid idea, and it would be a legacy project, not just for this council, but for the town to enjoy for quite some time. The only piece that I think probably holds all of us back with trepidation is how would we do this? What would be the financial sacrifice that we would have to make? And I guess all of us would want to understand that. I'm sure I speak for everyone who would be wondering what that impact would be and how we would go about it. But if there's a way to do this, I would declare my support. I'm certainly on board with it. I think it would be something that we would all utilize and enjoy for quite some time. It's just, what would that bill be? And if the public is watching this, I don't think anybody who is on council would be putting their hand up and saying they're just going to do it without understanding what that impact would be. But I do thank Ms. Bradley for all the work that she's done and the discussion tonight.
Very good. Any other councillors wish to comment at this moment? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Bradley, for your report tonight, and we receive it with some excitement. I think it's a great potential idea, as Councillor Taylor said, sort of a legacy thing for the town, and it works into, as Councillor Andrews has said, it works into economic development and tourism as well, which is important to support our local downtown businesses. So it's all good, I think, providing we respectfully discuss this with our Legion members and veterans who may be affected by this, hopefully positively affected by this. Okay, so let's move on now. Thank you, Ms. Bradley. 11.4.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being able to bring this exciting project forward, and I'm very happy with the support that I've heard from everybody today. So thank you very much.
Great, all the best. Okay, moving on. 11.4, we have Grant Armstrong wishes to speak to the pet store bylaw amendment. Mr. Armstrong.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Just before I talk about the pet store, I do want to say as an active military member, it's really nice to hear council talking about the needs of the veterans and the Legion in support of the monument. So thank you very much. I want to just say thanks you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to come out today. I was here last April to talk about pet stores, and first off to thank the clerks for the amazing report that's been issued, and I know you'll be reviewing later tonight. I wanted to highlight a couple of points in that report, as well as ask something that we'd like to make sure that you consider. So the first thing is I do want to highlight that the city or the town of Newmarket has moved aggressively towards banning pet stores selling animals, or is predominantly selling dogs and cats. It has passed their first committee and is on its way to council for their approval. I also wanted to note a couple things regarding Caledon, Centre Wellington, Guelph, and Aurelia. While they don't currently have any policies restricting it, from my research, I actually haven't been able to locate any pet stores that sell dogs or cats in those cities. So I just wanted to point that out as well. We do want to ask that the councils strongly consider option 3 as the right solution to pass. Predominantly what we want to talk about is there's a pet store in Newmarket that is being affected by this, and actually they had moved from Richmond Hill to Newmarket, and seeing as Orangeville is close and potentially doesn't have a bylaw, you could see another pet store moving from region to region as the local communities close this loophole of being allowed to sell pets and dogs, or dogs and cats, sorry. And the most important part is we really want to ask that the wording of, if you do choose option 3, that the wording of option 3 include not to sell, but that pet stores are encouraged to partner with animal shelters and adoption agencies and remove the opportunity to generate a profit on these. So that's all we wanted to come out tonight and talk about. Again, wanted to thank the clerks for putting this report together and all the information, and ask that council seriously consider taking option 3. And if they do go ahead with option 3, that if there's a possibility, I believe like Newmarket did as well, is to conduct an online survey so that residents can easily provide their input in.
Very good, Mr. Armstrong.
That's it. Thank you
very much. And I think we are, most of us, in support of having further public engagement on this matter. Any councillors wish to comment or ask a question here? Mr. Councillor Peters? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to the delegate, if he's still on the line. Just hoping for a point of clarification regarding you said about not getting a profit off the, I won't call it sale. So facilitation or partnership, if you will. Are there, in your research, do you have other municipalities that have gone one way or the other? Because the only point I want to make is that if a pet store is going through that option and is partnering with other facilities and using up, some of their resources to facilitate that type of arrangement, what are the pros and cons, I suppose, of allowing a slight profit or not if that partnership is with the right agency?
Absolutely. I mean, a small, and there's another delegate after me that can also probably add some to this as well. a small nominal cost to cover adoption fees and costs of carrying them, to putting in food and care, absolutely reasonable. A few $100s, small amounts like that. But what we are seeing when organizations are selling animals at a pet store, they're charging between $1,000 and $1,500. So that's an excessive amount. So we're asking, by all means, a reasonable adoption fee to cover, again, food, maintenance, electricity, all that is reasonable, and that's what we've seen in other areas.
Thanks for clarifying.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Moving on.
Thank you very much.
11.5, we have Casey Dunn, wishes to speak to pet store sales as well. Casey, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much for allowing me on the call this evening. Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you to the councillors. My name is Casey Dunn. I have been involved in advising on similar bylaws to the one that Orangeville is considering since 2013, when I first was involved in the city of Vaughan, which was one of the first cities to pass a similar bylaw. And I have been involved in a number of these cities over the years, having the opportunity to speak to councillors such as yourself as you're weighing on this option. So I did come to speak as well last year in April, and have given my support in the past to, I guess, what is being put forward as option number 3 from the staff report. I would like to reiterate my support for that movement. That is what we have seen in all of the other cities that we have participated in, from Toronto, Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Waterloo, Cambridge, Ottawa, Mississauga. This really is the general movement. I was involved just last week in Newmarket, where they did decide to move towards a complete ban of the retail sale of pets. And I would second what Grant just said in the previous delegation about looking at their staff report. It was quite robust. They got an overwhelming support from and response from their constituents. Over 93% were in support of moving towards that bylaw, with the majority of people favoring supporting shelters or rescues as a place to source their cats and dogs. So I would just like to reiterate, the Humane Society International, many partners that we've worked with in a number of these cities, all support moving away from a retail model where animals are sold for profit and as a retail product, and instead moving towards partnership models where animals are rehomed or adopted through kind of the traditional nonprofit routes. I myself have been involved in a number of stores helping through my organization, the Social Pet Work, to help kind of create those relationships, matching stores with partner organizations where they can host adoption days, host animals in their stores as a great community partnership. It is a great kind of marketing tool and an opportunity to get new customers in the store without placing kind of the burden of that retail sale on the care of the animals, where profit has to become a major issue. Happy to answer any questions if any of the councillors have any questions about any of the other cities that I have been involved in advising on this, and I would highly recommend taking a look at the Newmarket staff report, just because it is so thorough and so robust. And I think it gives a great example. Again, Newmarket was a city where we saw they didn't have any kind of protections or licensing around pet stores, and new stores were moving into that city to open up shop there because it was one of the few remaining cities left that hadn't looked at this issue. So I think it is something that Orangeville will want to consider what their stance is on that going forward. So hope to see your support for option number 3. Happy to answer any questions if I can be of any assistance to council.
Ms. Dunn, it's Mayor Brown. I wanted to ask you, some of the other municipalities that have enacted legislation to restrict sales of pets, if there were pet stores in those municipalities when the legislation came in, was there some sort of a sunset clause in the new legislation that allowed the pet stores to withdraw sales of animals over time, or was it a hard, and fast time deadline?
No, absolutely. I think in every case we've seen some version of a sunset clause. So never something that's going to come into effect like the next day or anything like that. Usually council has worked with, through staff and through consultations, worked with those stores to find what is a reasonable amount of time. I've seen usually somewhere around 1 year. But every city has been different, and it also depended on how many stores they were working with. I think in Ottawa they had like 5 stores that were still operating, so that was a larger adjustment to be made, whereas in some of the other cities it's only 1 or 2. So I think it's a bit of a case-by-case basis, but I think in all cases some time to change over that business model, to look at, for the store to reassess what their market is, to find those partner organizations to bring in, etc. It does take time, and I think everyone's understanding of that.
Okay. Any other councillors have any questions for Ms. Dunn? Seeing none. So, Ms. Dunn, thank you very much for for being a delegate tonight and for your information. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on getting all this online. I know it's challenging, and you're doing a great job of making this accessible for everyone, so thank you for that.
Well, that's our IT department and our clerks department have made us look good, so we want to give them kudos. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Good night.
Good night. Okay, moving on to staff reports. 12.1. This is a first quarter operating fund variance. Report has been received by council. We have a recommendation that reports CPS TF 2020-16 dated June 22nd, 2020, first quarter operating fund variance be received. May I have a motion to receive this? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Post. Does anybody wish to speak to this? Councillor Peters. Go ahead, sir.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just unmuting. Through you to Mr. Jones. The one line that sort of popped out, I think, was regards to public works and winter control activities. I know there's some ebb and flow in that budget line item. Some years are over, some years are under. Could you speak to whether this was just an under year, or maybe we had some in reserve from previous years? Could you speak to that? I guess it's almost 200,000 there as a favorable variance, and it says most of which was winter control activities.
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, essentially what we do when we're budgeting winter control is we take an average of our last 5 years of cost, and then we add a little bit for inflation. As you've noted, you're quite correct. There is an ebb and flow in our costs for winter control. And what we do is we take surpluses from winter control and put it into a winter control reserve in a good year. And then when we have a bad year, instead of pushing the entire budget into deficit because of it being a bad year, we draw from that reserve. So in this particular case, we had a favorable first quarter, and in winter control, and as a result, some of these monies would be transferred into reserve. And having a lighter year would probably result in a decline in the overall budget when we look at the 5-year average going into the 2021 budget year.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other councillors wish to speak to this? No. I did have a quick conversation today with Mr. Brennan, and I know our treasurer is already working on the second quarter report. Of course, not second quarter not completed till June 30th. It's going to be very interesting to see how COVID has affected our town financing in the second quarter, and I'm sure we're all anxious to see that sooner than later. And I understand Treasurer's on top of that, so Nandini, thank you very much, and we're looking forward to that report for second quarter. But it's good that we're in a positive situation in the first quarter. Okay, so we've had a motion there to receive this report. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, we'll move on. Staff report number 12.2, first quarter capital progress. Recommendation that reports CPS TF 2020-117 dated June 22nd, 2020. The first quarter capital progress be received. May I have a motion to receive this report? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, your video is off for me. Does everybody else see the deputy, or is it just my?
Yep, we see him.
And
Yeah, that's why you're not answering me when I
Okay.
keep putting my hand up.
sorry, pal, I don't. I can't see you here. Sorry, I apologize. See if I can.
I'll
bring
just
you-
yell out.
Yeah. Okay. So seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Does anybody wish to speak to the first quarter capital progress budget? Councillor Peters.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor. Apologies in advance for, I guess, a somewhat loaded question, but through you to perhaps the CAO or Madam Treasurer, there's a number of capital items that are being listed as in progress that are from budgets of many moons ago, that we'll say. So I obviously don't want to burden the conversation by going through some of the line items, but could you maybe speak in general to why some of these items may have been deferred, whether it's market conditions or other policies or plans that may impact the advancement of some of these initiatives? I know from the public's perspective, I would assume, their thought is that the money allocated for years spent in a given year. We know that doesn't happen all the time, but to see items from 2013, 14, 15 still cropping up on the reports, is there a staffing issue? Just maybe in a general sense, could Mr. Brennan or Ms. Nandini speak to that?
Mr. Brennan?
Yes, Your Worship. I can speak briefly on it. There has been a number of projects that have been identified, and many will have different reasons why they've been delayed. Be it, from one, we had a design issue that went on for a couple of years for a larger project. There are other projects that have slipped because of other workload and staffing, and just sometimes the timelines of getting it out. A number of those are in our infrastructure services department, and Mr. Jones have been working on a plan to ensure that we move those projects forward in a timely fashion, so that we can get the work done from our asset management side of things and the capital improvements and move forward. So yes, there have been, but there has been an acknowledgement from staff that we need to come up with a plan to move these projects forward, and that's what staff are working on at this time.
Okay. Councillor Peters, anything further?
No, I'm just glad to hear it's been acknowledged and we're moving forward. It's a shame to have the capital built up and not executed.
I would agree.
Okay, any further questions, councillors? Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. 12.3, this is Operations Center roof replacement, additional funding request. Recommendation that report ISPW 2020-002, the Operations Center roof replacement additional funding be received, and the council authorize the transfer of $120,000 from the General Capital Reserve Fund to the Operations Center roof replacement capital project. Wondering if Mr. Jones can just give us a brief overview on this particular item.
Certainly, Your Worship. As noted in the report, typically when there has needed to be minor repairs to the roof at the Operations Center, the money has come from our operating budget. We do have an allowance for overall maintenance on the Operations Center building. Unfortunately, around a year ago, we started seeing significant leaking coming through the Operations Center roof. And upon conducting an inspection, we realized that the problem was more significant than we would have liked, and we've concluded that the roof is at its end of life and that it needs to be replaced. As it has not been identified in the capital budget, we're asking council to transfer money from the general capital reserve into a capital account to allow us to move forward with the roof replacement.
Okay. Very good. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones,
Sure, but I'll get you in a second. Sorry.
What is the impact to us if we push this off to a budget here?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Taylor. If we push this off till the 2021 budget, it means that the work will not get done for some months. The issue is a problem now. It's creating a bit of a health and safety issue on the shop floor when it rains. And my understanding is that with it leaking right through the roof, there is additional damage that's being done. In all likelihood, by delaying it, the project will get more costly and we'll continue to have the issue with health and safety.
Okay. A follow-up, Councillor Taylor, and then we'll have Councillor Sherwood.
For sure. Through you, your worship. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your comments. I thought you were going to say that. I just wanted to make sure I understood. And believe me, as property owners, I think all of us understand that these emergencies crop up over time. I guess I don't have a thought other. I'm thinking as I go here, but this council, myself included, is guilty of this. And it's a here we go again, teammates. And that is, we're going to spend from the general reserve. We've got something that's of significance that's not budgeted. We continue to do this. I don't see a way of not fixing your roof. Like, it doesn't make sense to not fix it. So I get it. I guess it's just another word of caution, and potentially it's something for our CIO, Mr. Brennan, to think about when we're doing our budgeting, and maybe we should have a more in-depth discussion. I'm not sure. We're learning as we go. We're here and kind of halfway through our term, but it makes me unsettled with all the different things that we've done outside of the process. And this is just one more. And Mr. Jones, I'll vote to fix the roof. It's just an overall comment for council.
Okay, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, your worship. Councillor Taylor actually asked my question, and I will just make a comment. However, it's quite known that I am not in favor of taking money from reserves. I'm very much, it must be in the budget or bring it to the budget. But it sounds like what we're being told by Mr. Jones is that if we prolong this much longer, it could end up costing us more because of other things that, a domino effect that it could cause. So I will be biting my tongue on this one, and I will be voting in favor of taking from reserves, even though that isn't a stand I'd usually like to take.
Okay, any councillors, anybody else wish to? Councillor Peters, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sort of a general comment and a question. So obviously the work needs to be done. I'm in favor there. But to broaden the conversation a little bit, as you know, we've been speaking with Orangeville Hydro about some solar opportunities. We're looking at a very large flat roof that's municipally owned. And so I guess the question through you to Mr. Jones would be, is there a way to work in a structural inspection while we're doing the roof work to see whether or not it could house solar in the future, whether that's near term or long term? And then, keep that in consideration moving forward as a potential site for photovoltaics.
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship, to Councillor Peters, that's something that we hadn't given any thought to. Certainly, if that's council's direction, we can take a look at it structurally and determine whether this is a possibility at some point in the future. I don't know what the cost of that would be, however.
No, and if I may just follow up, I was very pleased to see that the roof is going with an EPDM instead of modified bitumen. Dealing with the commercial construction sector, I think that's a much better choice. And whether this would have to be a motion or perhaps just a friendly suggestion, I would suggest that we go with the white color roof in this case for reduced urban heat island effect and climate change initiatives. And I know from my professional work that the color has no impact on cost. So I think that would align well with the SNAP and would have no impact on the budget.
Okay. Mr. Jones, do you wish to comment on
that? Through your worship, I don't. Certainly, if that's the will of council, we can certainly ensure that the roof that we put on is white.
Very good. Okay, Councillor Taylor. You're muted, sir.
Yeah, you got to keep doing it each meeting, right? Your worship, I would have no issue with Councillor Peters' input. I think that makes good sense. I'm wondering through you to Ms. Syed, if it would make sense to guard against our reserves a little bit and bring forward either a motion or a thought or a will that this is brought into the 2021 budget with the idea of replenishing the reserves that we're taking here, because this isn't a planned expense. So essentially, if we were to push it off, we would have it in the budget. In this way, we would pay for it in 2021, but by putting it back into the reserves.
Well, I'm not going to speak to Ms. Syed, let her answer, but we have 9 million in reserves here, it looks like. So I guess the intention would be to take it now and replace it in 2021. But Ms. Syed, you go right ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Through your Worship to Councillor Taylor. Yes, I do agree with the Mayor. We can take it out of the reserve and replenish it through the 2021 budget. Just a quick remark, if I may. Reserves are meant for, in some instances, to be used as a contingency fund. And this particular case, for this project, a general reserve can be used as a contingency fund. So it is not unusual to have projects come up during the year for whatever reason. And most of the time, municipalities do look into their reserve envelope to fund those projects. I just wanted to bring that to the forefront. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I agree. 9 is a nice figure, and we certainly have a large amount in there, but we do have some significant potential expenses coming with disbandment. Certainly we could borrow it or we could spend from reserves, but just want to be overly cautious, that's all.
Very good. And part of this conversation is also around just generally asset management. I know the town staff is very cognizant of this, and you know, as we continue to look at asset management strategy, the data and the information on our infrastructure and assets will become more and more refined, and that will help us in our budgets going forward. So things like an engineering study on a building, I guess, would be part of asset management, and that might have uncovered this. And I think that those are the kind of things that we'll be finding in our budget going forward as we look at asset management and more tightly. Okay, did we get a motion there? I think we did, didn't we? Okay, Councillor Peters, seconded by?
Sorry, if I could...
you want to speak again to it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to put forth a motion. I don't believe one had been made with the 2 slight amendments to investigate the cost of a structural report with the intent of potential future solar, as well as directing staff to go with a white roof.
Okay, Councillor Taylor, do you wish to second that amendment? You do?
Your Worship.
Yes. Mr. Brennan.
If I could have one question to Councillor Peters. It's my understanding that you may go with a different colored roof, not just white, but it will have the same reflective properties of not the heat attraction and stuff. Would that be suffice as well?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, the general concept there is when it comes to roofing, there's what they call the SRI, the Solar Reflectance Index. And so best practice would be to have an SRI of 80 or above, which is generally a white roof, but there are several materials that could get you there. And then just as a follow-up, if and when solar was pursued on that roof, the reflection off of the roof would improve the output of that system if it was white.
Correct. Very good. Okay, so we have a motion here, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Councillors, any further discussion on this? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. All right, moving on to our next staff report. This is on pet shop bylaw, CPS CL 2020-015 regarding the pet shop bylaw, and that be received. Now, this is, I'm sorry, there's 3 options here. So I think we've all read those options, all council members. Deputy Mayor McIntosh wishes to speak to this item. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to make a motion that we accept option 3. And if I could ask a question of the clerk through you, if we're unable to hold a public meeting in September, what would we do?
Madam Clerk.
If we were unable to hold a public meeting in September, we would then shift it to a later month. We are facilitating though public meetings through electronic participation right now, and we have one coming up on July the 6th. And so as we move forward, we will ensure that we're able to engage the public either through telephone, written submissions, if need be, or through participating in the meeting in teams where you've seen other delegates give their presentations and the ability to share their screens. So depending on the circumstances at the time, we will ensure that we're able to facilitate the public engagement.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's also a recommendation that maybe a survey put out to the public. So perhaps we could endeavor to do that as well. Sorry, Deputy Mayor McIntosh, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'd just like to make that motion that we accept option 3.
Okay. May I have a seconder for that? Councillor Post is seconding it?
Yes, can I just add?
Yes, let's go ahead. You go first. I know
I would like
Councillor would like to speak to it as well. Go ahead.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to second it with the addition of the survey that was suggested by Mr. Armstrong. So if we could just have a friendly amendment to add that in, I would second the motion with that addition of the survey.
Deputy Mayor McIntosh, is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood wishes to speak to this. Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
Actually, Councillor Post just beat me to the punch because I wanted to make sure that we had an online survey similar to what we've had on some other issues throughout the town. As much input, do we want to have a deadline for that? You mentioned September, but do we want to kind of have a specific date to the clerk?
Getting the suggestion that we'll leave that to staff to coordinate, Councillor Sherwood.
Okay, and follow up, Your Worship, as well as what are the thoughts of the current one pet store and the grandfathering of them and time frame?
Yeah, well, that will be, I think, put into the public meeting, and out of that will come what the final bylaw is, and again, whether there's a sunset clause or some grandfathering of the one existing pet shop that's in town right now.
Okay, so thank you, Your Worship.
Certainly, you know, if we go back to the discussion from last year, here's a small business that's been in town for, I think, 40 years. There hasn't been, you know, a lot of negative issues with respect to selling pets in that particular store. We want to support our small businesses, so we do need to tread carefully with that small business, and I hope we can be kind and have some empathy going forward with this bylaw. Anybody else wish to speak to this before we vote on it? Seeing none. So we had a couple of friendly amendments in there. Madam Clerk, you got that? Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, moving along, we have correspondence we've received from Judy Ransom. This is a resident who sent an email letter into us supporting a requirement that Georgian College has asked us to look into putting in a pedestrian crosswalk on Centennial adjacent to the Georgian College campus to allow students to safely cross Centennial to get to the ancillary parking lot on the north side of Centennial. So thank you, Ms. Ransom, for that. Can we have a motion to receive that correspondence? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any further conversation regarding that, councillors?
Very quickly, Your Worship.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. I know that in a previous council meeting, I ended up supporting this particular request, and I know that we had posed the question, if I do recall, to Mr. Jones, Has there been any further investigation? Not to say that we had requests to have this looked at, but has Mr. Jones and or your staff, I know that we're busy with all kinds of other things that are going on, but any updates on this particular request at all, Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews, it was the May 11th meeting, and my review of the notes from that meeting was that council asked that staff look into this. Looking into it is something that's going to happen after things return to normal a little bit more, because ultimately what we need to evaluate whether a pedestrian crossover is appropriate at this location or not are both traffic counts and pedestrian counts. And while I would suggest probably traffic is beginning to return to normal, certainly I don't think that the pedestrian numbers would be anywhere close to normal without Georgian College operating. So once Georgian College is back operating, we'll be able to conduct those pedestrian counts and traffic counts to determine whether this location meets the warrants for a pedestrian crossover or not.
Great, thank you very much. And then again, knowing how post-secondary will be operating this fall, anticipate that there will be far less student activity at that location, as most of it will be conducted online. And again, they would be able to provide that clarification, but that seems to be the case across the board from at least the post-secondary sector. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Since I see the original documentation was addressed to Councillor Post, Councillor Post, did you have an opportunity to let this resident know that we are having staff look into that into the future? She alludes to that she read it in the article, but we know that not all the meat and potatoes of the information is in a news article. So I just wondered if you had a chance to have a dialogue with her.
Councillor
Yes.
Post.
Yes, I did. I responded to the resident specifically and just let her know what had been discussed at the council meeting and how that would be progressing, and that I would keep her in the loop if there was any changes to any of that timeline.
Very good. Okay, so I've got one more item here. This was received this afternoon and circulated to council. It was an email from Mr. Martin Field. And this is, again, regarding the pet shop bylaw. He wanted to share some further information. So I'm going to combine these two pieces of correspondence. I'd like a motion to receive both pieces of correspondence. Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor. I can't see you, Deputy Mayor McIntosh. I'm sorry. There's something wrong here with our video connection. I apologize. So Councillor Sherwood seconded that. All in favor of receiving these two pieces of correspondence? Thank you very much, councillors. Moving on to committee and board meetings. This is a recommendation that the minutes of the following meetings be received. That is 14.1, Committee of Adjustment on February 5th, 2020. 14.2 is Committee of Adjustment March the 4th, 2020. 14.3 is the Orangeville Police Services Board meeting minutes of February the 11th, 2020, and 14.4 is the Orangeville Public Library Board, April 29th, 2020. May I have a motion to receive these minutes? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any discussions on these minutes, councillors? All in favor of receiving these minutes? Okay, moving on. We have no notices of motion prior to meeting, and I don't know if we have any notices of motion at the meeting. Councillors? We see none. New business. I have one item. Councillor Taylor, I see your hand up. I just wanted to ask Mr. Osmond if, prior to talking to Councillor Taylor, if you could give us just a brief recap on opening of recreation facilities, including things like splash pads and pools and things that the province has allowed. If you can just give us a brief update, sir, on how you're making out and what the plans are to share with the public. Mr. Osmond.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I should preface my comments by saying, yeah, we are definitely living in interesting times. And it's been a busy world in terms of community services and also in terms of recreation per se. From a facility perspective, first off, let me say that in the outside world, sport facilities such as trails, parks are all operational. When it comes to sport fields, They're open to public use, but not open to games or actual teams being on the fields to play. There is in stage 2, they can do skill development with very low numbers, like a coach can go out and kick a soccer ball around with a player, those kinds of things, or a family can get together and go out on the field as long as they practice social distancing and so on. And those things are happening now as we speak. When it comes to the splash pads, I'm happy to report as of today that we finally get everything lined up in terms of some of the health sector pieces. We were waiting for things that came in over the weekend, and we are now going to launch the splash pads. First off, Finley will be launching on Friday, and as of today, getting word back from the contractor on Every Kids Park that will be checked and commissioned by Thursday. And our intent is to have both of these splash pads up and running on Friday, later on Friday at 12 noon.
Very good.
With respect to the splash pads, though, it was our intention to launch the Every Kids on July 1st. And because because of all the warm conditions that we thought if we can, we'd like to activate both at the same time because we're really concerned that we're going to get large turnouts and try to spread it out over 2 facilities if we can. In doing that, some of the things that you need to be aware of, and the public should be aware of, is splash pads by their very nature are a huge draw for kids and children. And what we want to do is we have to make sure we practice social distancing on that space, but we also have to limit numbers on the space. So it's going to take a lot of cooperation from various people involved, parents in particular, making sure that our children are aware they must, after so many minutes, leave the splash pad and let others on. So there's going to be a lot of sharing of space. There's going to be a lot of cooperation and patience and so on in trying to do this. One of the things we will be doing is we're going to have staff in the first week or so on site to educate the public on how to do some of these things and to make sure that they do practice physical distancing because COVID-19 has not gone away. It's still in our environment. We want to make sure we do everything possible to make it safe. On the other end as well, the public washrooms in those locations, and we need staff to do the cleaning and disinfection of those washrooms on a regular basis. Likewise, this pad has got to be closed a couple times during the day to do a special disinfection, making sure we're staying on top of the protocols. So that will happen starting on Friday. In the indoor facility perspective, we have not opened the indoor facilities, i.e. Reed Center and Tony Rose as an example. We are taking a close look at the aquatics world. From aquatics perspective, quite frankly, and I've said this maybe before, is our business model is designed to deal with volumes of people. To give you an example, Halder would see anywhere from 850,000 to 1 million people a year to go through his doors for all kinds of different reasons. Aquatics being a huge part of that business. In this case, what we have now is we have a situation where aquatics, the protocol for aquatics coming out of national swimming, as well as life saving and the health sector, is that we can only have 6 swimmers in a pool for lane swimming at a time. We can only have a certain number of people in the pool for aquafit, as an example, 10 to 12, depending on how we lay out the pool. And so those numbers are going to be difficult for us to work with. We have engaged discussions with the Otters Swim Club, see what they would do. And likewise, they would start up on a very gradual basis. And so we're looking at how we would do that. In terms of protocols, to give you an example, the Otters wouldn't come in and go in change rooms. They would go right on the deck. So they come in dressed. There'd be no going into change rooms, just so that they can get in and get out without having to have all the touch points in the change room. So from that perspective, the pool program, we're kind of looking at all of our different scenarios to how we can open it up. The big issue for us would be that we generally operate with a revenue intake of somewhere between $2.8, $2.9 million a year in the aquatics area. And if we look at our best case scenario, we're looking at probably as low as 25% of that. If we do the protocols as we got put in place. So we're looking at how we could launch a program, bring back staff and those kinds of things. And I think we're still going to be a little gradual. The big concern, quite frankly, with the aquatics is that when we did our shutdown of aquatics, we drained the pools. And while we had the pools drained, Alder in particular, Alder is a I won't say the brand name, but Alder is a vinyl-based pool. it has a vinyl basin. And when we did the checks on the basin, we had a consultant come in and check the condition of that basin while we had her shut down. And a couple of years ago, we did the repairs to the Alder Basin. We repaired 250 to 260 holes, pinholes and stretches and cracks in the membrane or in the basin. And we had them come back and take a check while we were in shutdown. Now we had a delay on that because they wouldn't come in and do the check during the COVID until they got approvals to go into a building. And we've done that. We have a big concern now with Alder. Alder, by its very nature, because of vinyl, is kind of shrunk, if you would, because of the condition of the particular vinyl material. Vinyl, in this particular case in Alder, when it was built in 2003, was given a lifespan of 15 years. So a couple of years ago, we drained it and we repaired it. We could buy ourselves hopefully a couple of years. Well, now we're into our third year, and we're seeing problems with that. A couple of things can happen. We can take a bit of a gamble and we can do another repair, and that repair could cost us around $20,000 to $30,000, and we could get ourselves some extra time, or maybe not, depending on how that would that pool condition will exist or not exist going forward in terms of when the water hits it. If you recall, in our budget in 2020, we brought forward the pool basin, or the pool itself, to do an expansion to 8 lanes and to replace the liner, and we applied under ICIP. And the ICIP, we haven't got approval on at this point. It's not been released. There's no updates on it. So far, the feds are kind of sitting on it, and we don't have an answer. So we had a situation where we did have the funding in the project in our budget to replace the liner, but we added it to ICIP, hoping that we would get a grant. So we didn't get the grant at this point. So my concern now is that we can spend the $20,000 or $30,000 to do the repair and try to save ourselves some time while we're still waiting for ICIP, or we can take a look at more details on what we can do with the pool while we're in this kind of shutdown and while we got these low numbers in terms of our business model, if you would. We do have Tony Rolls, of course, as a backup. That's a much smaller pool, and Alder is our flagship, if you would, in terms of the number of the capacity of that particular pool. Now, there's 2 pools at Alder. I'll call it the top pool. The top pool itself, there are some problems, but not something we can't fix. But the main pool, the main basin, our 6-lane pool, we would be taking a gamble if we were to do some repairs, fill it up, and see what kind of time frame we can get out of it. But it brings back our original concern about our lifespan of that vinyl material. We've reached it, and there's 2 ways looking at it, I guess. One is we could have an opportunity here to replace it. I can assure you that from a design perspective, putting a vinyl membrane back in that pool is not one that I would be recommending. In fact, there's a lot of pools around just put in with vinyl, and they're having a lot of trouble with it over the years, but also over 2 or 3 year period, new ones. That being said, we have looked at some new technology. An example will be stainless steel that's in the market now. Stainless steel has got a long longevity of many, many years, 30 to 50 years, depending on the size and dimension and what's going in that particular environment. So we are taking a look at that. I'm really concerned about how we launch our swim program. If we launch a program at Alder, we do it knowing that we have a problem with our basin, or we would hold off and bring back a full report to council on what you can do with that basin in Alder in the next few months to correct the problem for the long term, and then go back to Tony Rolls as a backup and launch a program at Tony Rolls. So that's the kind of scenario I got in front of me now, and I'm looking at the pool, and that's a concern for when we launch the actual aquatics program itself. Given that the aquatics program won't be very much in terms of from a economics perspective, it's not going to generate a lot of revenue. If there's a time to do the job, it would be sometime in the next few months when you're in this kind of shutdown. So that's that particular part of the operation. I will tell you that we have just received all the information back from the National Hockey Leagues in terms of what's going to happen with the ice side, and we're doing a complete review. We're scheduling meetings now with minor hockey to see how they're going to start their program up. Give you an example, they can't have players 5 or 10 players on ice surface at a time, but they can't be sitting near each other on a bench. We got to make certain things in the dressing room, and there's a whole protocol around that. So there's a real big concern about how we can start up. We could conceivably be putting ice on in August if we get all the protocols in place and minor hockey does their thing, and recreation hockey and so on and so forth. So those pieces are in the works right now. So right now we're looking at, then we go into the summer recreation program. We looked at summer recreation program again from a financial perspective. We are challenged. Generally, we operate our summer program pretty much at break even. We take in somewhere between $285,000 to $300,000 a year in summer program. And right now, based on the protocols we have in place from the public health people, as well as protocols from running programs itself in certain sectors, we have a situation where we're down to probably less than 25%. We did do a survey of our 13,000 clients that we have on our Perfect Mind system, and the survey came back saying that we would probably get 14% of the people coming back during the months of July and August to the program, and that pretty much would be the ballpark. What we have done, because we wouldn't be able to run an ordinary program, original program, the one we normally run, is we looked at doing a program series so that we would have programs that would be primarily, for the most part, outdoors. So we do an outdoor program with some indoor, using our smaller facility like Diane Drive, Lions Park, because it's got a great outdoors. And likewise, we could do it at Alder, but we do the Alder field in the back, and we would do some connection to Alder by using the Saputo room and trying to stay as much as possible in one particular part of the building and not spread through the whole building, to try to minimize our impact on the particular building for cleaning and so on. And our numbers would be down somewhere around $60,000 to $70,000 for the summer if we do it that way on a very low scale program. But we're certainly set up to do that. But council needs to be aware we wouldn't be generating the revenues that we normally would do, and we would expend probably double the cost in terms of our staff to get the program delivered. So that's the overview of where we're to right now on the recreation side of things. Just one more program. Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Just one more program I want to cover is that we want to cover off on the library. I want to say the library is doing some great work. Our curbside program is doing phenomenally. We're averaging 40 to 50 clients a day to our curbside pickup. Thousands of pieces of material going out to the public, and they're functioning really, really well. And we're going to maintain the curbside because we're basically taking care of our business on the curbside. Keep the building shut for the time being until we see how things happen in July and August.
I wanted to ask you, what are other municipalities doing with summer programs? I've heard some of them just decide to shut down because it doesn't make any sense to try and get it rolling.
That's correct. A lot of communities have not opened pools. Not open pools. Some have, where they have outdoor pools, have done the outdoor pool openings, and some have, some haven't. Indoor pools, for the most part, they're not opening. A lot of pools are not opening. The recreation programs, likewise, some communities have said we'll leave it until September, leave the summer program this year, and try to get our buildings and our programs back up and running by September when we have a better comfort level. I think what's happening is that we are seeing some feedback from the public where there's a comfort level of what do we do, in a program. So, as to give you an example, we can only have 5 children in a program per staff member. And they have to be in their own space. They have to stay in their own group. They can't have one cohort in with another cohort. They have to stay in their own 5 and then the next 5 in another room and so on, or in outdoor spaces. So they can't mix. So it's going to be very stringent how we deal with kids. As an example, when children get dropped off, the parent can't come in with the child. They must have dropped off at the curbside. And our staff would pick them up at curbside. We'd do the assessments and all these kinds of things, the self-assessments. And we would bring them into the building, and then they would stay in a particular space. They would eat together, they would play together, and so on and so forth, and they would play together by social distancing. So the experience was completely different in terms of what we're used to. We're used to being close to each other, and we're used to playing with each other and that sort of thing. So it will be a different experience, and it's going to be a new orientation, if you would, for not just for children, but for parents as well. But it's something that you could launch, and we would launch it as almost like a test case and do it that way. Otherwise, we would not do it, and we would hold off until next year and get back to some kind of normal next year. And I'll say it again, is that, you know, I don't like to use words because some people are kind of tired of it, but the fact of the matter is that pre-COVID, we were based on high volumes. We built 150,000 square foot buildings for high volumes. We built it to get as many people into a program as possible. And now we're doing the reverse of that. We are in post-COVID, and in post-COVID, everything from a program space of any sort, whether you're playing on a soccer field, whether you're playing or swimming in a swimming pool, or you're going into a gymnasium, it's complete different layout in terms of how you program that space, keeping people apart all the time, make sure that the 6 feet is always there. But also you got to keep in mind that when you go to a washroom, we had to be on top of what we do in a washroom, albeit I got to tell you that the data and the information coming out of health changes on a regular basis. It's an ongoing process. We got new research that says this and so on. So splash pads by their very nature are one of the easiest things we can do right now. But the biggest thing we got to do with our splash pads is to make sure that parents are very much aware that they have to be on top of their child when they come to the area, and to be very patient and ask their child to leave and let another child have an opportunity. My big concern with that, by the way, is how we can try to get people out of the sun while they're waiting in a line to get on the pad. And we're going to do that this Friday. We're going to get it started. And if we have a problem with our numbers, we have a problem with congestion on these pads, then we'll have no choice but to shut these things down.
Right. You ever thought about wristbands of some sort, Ray?
Yes, we did look at the wristband scenario. We can give people wristbands and do it by color, and we might have to use that right now, Your Worship. What we want to do is we want to try to keep it as normal as possible for children when they show up to the pad, so they can run and play on the pad. One of the big problems, of course, we have now, if you understand our design, is that our splash pads are designed with a playground structure. And we cannot access, the kids can't access the play structure. So right now, when you go to every kid's, you're going to see the splash pad open up, and all the brand new play structure is completely fenced with 6-foot fencing, and we can't have the child go in. So that would give us some relief between going to one play structure and going to the pad. You can break up the group of kids in the particular area. In this case, we can't do that. Right now, they're going to converge on every kid's on Friday, and they're just going to be on the splash pad, and they can go nowhere else except on the grass, if you would. And the structures are all ready. Everything is finished on time, and we're ready to rock and roll, if you would. But right now we have to keep all the play structures, likewise in Findlay, play structures are completely closed off, and we're just dealing with the pad itself.
Okay. Does any councillors wish to ask Mr. Osmond any questions on his report there? Seeing none, Councillor Taylor, you had your hand up to talk about new business. The floor is yours.
I did, Your Worship, but I'd also like to ask Mr. Osmond a question, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Mr. Osmond, I think the mayor said a brief report. That was a very detailed report. I certainly appreciate it. And I was writing down some of the things you said, and I think the public is going to be very excited about what you have in place. And 2 questions, if I may, and I'll just ask them both and be quiet. But the one was, as I missed your comment about the 10 players on the ice. I just didn't quite grasp that. Maybe you could just tell me one more time. And the other question that I think that parents are going to be wondering about is, we mentioned now that some parents can't go into places and children may be on their own as they go through some of these facilities, and as the safety aspect for their well-being, because we've had other social issues you know, in the past, not necessarily in these facilities or significant examples, but I'm just wondering about that, because I'm hoping we're not going to solve one problem but potentially cause another. Has any thought been given to that?
Mr. Osmond.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Taylor. First of all, on the hockey one, basically what you're going to see on the hockey is a lot of skill development. And the largest, the number of players on the ice at one time for skill development will be 10 players. And right now they're looking at it that way. There's not a lot of games on the ice. As actual fact is mostly all skill development. And in the case of some programs, they may look at playing 3-on-3 on a full ice surface. That's what's coming out of the National Hockey side. And in rec hockey as an example, they can play hockey by reducing the numbers. The other problem we have is how we actually do the dressing room piece, and that's something that the facility people got to deal with. That's us. And we're looking at that because you can't have people sitting within 6 feet of each other, or you got to be 6 feet, between 6 feet. And so our dressing rooms are designed for, if you would, for like upwards to 20 people in a room. And we're talking about, 15 players, coaches, staff, and so on. And we have to really restrict the numbers in those rooms. So that's a whole different ball game for us to get into August and getting into launching our ICE program. So that's something we're working on. That's where that came from. In the case of a child, it's very similar to daycare. And what the public health have done in sense of daycare is they must show up to the curb, and the daycare worker would pick them up at the curb, bring them in. They'll be all screened prior to showing up. So the parent would screen the child, similar to what we would do. They would screen them. There's no fevers, no symptoms in the last number of hours, so on and so forth. So all that will still happen, but when they come to the curb, there's no adult can come in the building. It's just the kids, or come into the program, just the kids. And that's the way it's done in the based on the protocols. So they're safe. Their health and safety is number one. And when they come in, of course, we'll be telling the parents exactly where you're going to be to, and how things are going to be structured, and all those kinds of things. But parents, adults can't come in the facility. And then when the program is over, we bring the child to the front part of the building, if you would, or if it's on a field, it's great because you can see them. And we bring the child one by one out to the parents. And that's just a protocol around running a program, so everybody feels safe and comfortable around the actual engagement with staff and engagement with the public.
Very good. Thank you. Do you have another item, Mr. Taylor, you want to speak to?
Just under new business, if we could, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Okay. Two questions, if I could, and Your Worship, through you, the clerk. I was just wondering, Ms. Landry, did we establish what we were doing moving forward as a council regarding addresses for delegates and questions? I think it's relevant because if we had out-of-town guests, it's interesting to understand what the I guess what their perspective is, why they're presenting to Orangeville Council. And we used to do that. It was common practice. I don't necessarily need to hear the address, but I think people should declare which town they live in.
Councillor Taylor and the rest of council, there isn't anything specifically included in the procedural bylaw in that regard. Certainly the procedural bylaw is up for review this coming year. So we have made a note with respect to that matter that you did bring forward, and certainly we will address it in the report. And if council wishes to include something in the procedural bylaw to account for the delegate indicating where they're from, perhaps not the specific address, then certainly that can be done.
Thank you. May I ask one other question, Your Worship? Through you to Public Works, to Mr. Jones. I have noticed, and I have had some queries about the town's feeling about boulevard cutting and just general maintenance overall. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, it might be you, Mr. Osmond, excuse me. But the boulevards in many places aren't cut. They're not maintained. I'm just curious if that was a conscious decision. Is there something happening moving forward? Has something changed? The town just doesn't quite look like it normally looks.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Taylor, I'd need to know the specifics of the exact locations. Generally speaking, no, we are continuing to provide the level of service that we typically provide. Certainly June is a time when grass grows quite quickly. We haven't brought on summer students this year, so most of this sort of work is being done by full-time staff. So it's possible that it may be a little bit slower than usual. But if you have any specific locations, I'd be very interested to hear what those are, and I can follow up with staff.
Okay, I'll send you a note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, Councillor Post?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make everybody in Orangeville aware that this coming Saturday evening, Celebrate Your Awesome has gone virtual, and everybody can tune in on the Celebrate Your Awesome Facebook page for a really fun new twist on how we're having our party. So it's going to be a virtual house party with DJs and music and fun, and just celebrating Pride the way that Orangeville has been doing really well for the last couple of years. So I just wanted to make everybody aware to jump onto the Facebook page on Saturday night.
Very good. Okay, councillors, any other new business? Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. I just wanted to send out a reminder to those citizens regarding Canada Day on July 1st. We won't be meeting again before then, but I just wanted to make people aware that we are still, even though it is very sad we can't get together as a community and celebrate all together with fireworks and fun and all kinds of activities that we've grown accustomed to in our community. The town did do a press release just a few days ago indicating that we are still going to paint the town red. We can still enjoy some Canadian heritage. So I encourage everyone to join us virtually and do whatever we can, like hang Canadian flags in our homes, decorate our homes, and also on our website, they can click on some links to the Canadian heritage that has some type of celebration kits that give people ideas of what we can do. So even though we can as a community celebrate Canada Day, let's try and participate virtually and still celebrate the best that we can.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Great points there. Okay, anything else for new business, folks? Seeing none, I've been notified that there are no questions from the public for question period. So we'll move on to bylaws. This is a recommendation. The bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. And it is a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council, the corporation of the town of Orangeville, its regular and closed council meeting held on June 22nd. May I have a motion for that bylaw, please? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? And then we have a motion to adjourn. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Okay, thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Canada Day.
Happy Canada Day to everyone.
Thank you,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.